Today on the Playbook Podcast, Donald Trump is back in DC after his triumphant trip to the Middle East. New trade barriers come into effect between the U.S. and China, the latest on that trade war. And it is day 14, count them, 14 of the government shutdown. Where do we go from here? Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Megan Messerly. It's Tuesday, October 14th.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. Great to have you back with us, Megan. The president's had a brutally long day, and I sort of figured he might, take the win. But no, he's got a packed agenda.
Nope.
This Tuesday, which we will talk you guys through in a minute. He just doesn't stop. The guy is 79 and a half years old. What is this? It's amazing, isn't it?
I know. I'm 32 and I look at it and I'm just exhausted looking at his schedule.
Let's talk a little bit about yesterday and what happened before we get into to moving it forward, Megan, because it was obviously an incredibly historic day. I reckon this was the best day of Donald Trump's presidency. He's pulled off something really remarkable here, at least it's early days, but it feels like of a different magnitude to anything that he's achieved before as president. What do you think of that?
It really does feel incredibly different. And I think you've seen that in just the positive reaction across the board to what is happening right now. We saw on Monday, the remaining 20 Israeli hostages be released by Hamas. President Trump took this victory lap in Israel and in Egypt, and this is being universally hailed as an incredible accomplishment. You've even seen former President Bill Clinton come out and say and credit President Trump by name, saying, this is a historic achievement. And so, again, I think lots of folks will have varying opinions on the president, but it's really hard to underplay the momentousness of what we're seeing happen right now. Of course, the big question is where we go from here, right? And does this peace hold?
Absolutely. But it feels at this moment, this is like a total dream come true. It's like a fantasy of Donald Trump, like all these former presidents who are all coming out and saying how great he is. Every media outlet saying what a great deal he is. He had all those world leaders stood behind him yesterday. This time, everyone really means it. And he must know that. And you can see how much he's enjoying it, right?
Yeah, they really do. I mean, this is all extremely genuine praise for the president when they're saying, look, Mr. President, this is a tremendous accomplishment. They really do mean it's a tremendous accomplishment. This is a conflict that has been going on for as the president says, literally thousands of years. And again, we're just at the beginning of seeing, whether all of this holds. But it is an extremely noteworthy and monumental achievement.
And it strikes me as well that his particular unique skill set, which has often not been terribly effective on the international stage, it really aligned here. And the way that he was prepared to attack Iran out of the blue, the way he was prepared to strong arm Netanyahu at the moment of impact, the way his threats towards Hamas carried a real credibility with them. Even his sort of weirdly close relationship with authoritarian leaders and dictators around the Middle East, which other US presidents, for very good reasons, have shied away from. All of that came together and the stars aligned, and the Trump approach worked more effectively than that of previous presidents. And as I say, there's very good reasons why other presidents have never taken this approach, and lots of it comes with a lot of risk. There are concerns about democracy and so on. But in this moment, the Trump approach has worked really well.
I've seen a lot of folks on social media who are, part of the president's MAGA base, but, not the sort of hawkish, aggressive foreign policy folks, sort of praising this moment, obviously, but saying, this is not the Israel first approach that, a lot of prior U.S. administrations have taken. The fact that he was willing to buck Benjamin Netanyahu at times, but also was extremely unpredictable and Hamas also not able to gauge what move he was going to take. I mean, that uncertainty and instability really worked to his benefit here to sort of be able to give his negotiators the leverage they needed to ultimately get this, 20-point plan across the finish line.
There's a pretty big but. You alluded to it before, Megan, and it was worrying for me watching the president spoke so many hours yesterday in different settings. It took quite a while just to keep up with all of the different stuff he said. But there's a moment which I thought was quite striking in one of the speeches that he made in the Middle East, where he was talking about how beautiful it was to see a beautiful day rising. Fair enough. Now the rebuilding begins. And he said the rebuilding is maybe going to be the easiest part. I think we've done a lot of the hardest part because the rest comes together. Well, that is not my analysis of where we're at. That is not most Middle East experts' analysis of where we're at. They've done a stage one deal here to get the hostages home, and all power to them. There is so much more detail that needs to be agreed between parties, getting Hamas to put down their weapons and not take them up again, finding a solution to the governance of Gaza. Like, these are massive, intractable problems. The idea that like the rest just comes together, I mean, I hope so, but it doesn't feel like that at the moment.
No, this is an extremely complicated road ahead. Yesterday we heard the president's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, talk about this, saying that he and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who played a key role in all of this, that they are going to be there on the ground in the weeks and months to come, right? I think that alone sort of speaks volumes to the amount of work ahead. If it was mission accomplished, they would be moving on. But there are really significant questions, as you alluded to, about, what is the governance structure in Gaza moving forward, right? We have this board of peace, we have this, technocratic Palestinian governing authority. The 20-point peace plan, does acknowledge that it is the goal of the Palestinian people to have their own state, but just says that that kind of thing may be a possibility. There are no guarantees. And the president, he was actually asked about this last night on Air Force One during a refueling stop in the United Kingdom on his way back. And he was asked, what's the road ahead for governing Gaza? And this idea of the one state, two state solution came up. And he said, a lot of people like one state, a lot of people like two state. We'll have to see. I haven't commented on that. And he did not weigh in there. And I think that alone sort of speaks to the extremely challenging, extremely heated, controversial issues that still need to be sorted out, as tremendous and momentous as this moment is.
Yeah, and there's definitely a danger that the president, who is not a big details guy a lot of the time, sort of banks this as a win and thinks it's time to move on, when in fact so many of the hard yards are still ahead. And you could almost hear him moving on. In another of the speeches, he turned to, I think it was Witkoff, and said, right, Steve, now we've got to get Russia done as well.
Yes.
And sure enough, he's back into DC this morning. He's got Zelensky, we learned, coming over, the president of Ukraine, this Friday to talk about how that war is developing. And we heard Trump over the weekend talking about the possibility of supplying Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles, a whole nother level of weaponry that they have not yet had access to. I think the sense is he feels like he's on a roll here, and he got that one done. Right, let's try and keep this moving and get this one done as well, and I'll just solve all the world's problems. This one's proven to be a lot harder than he expected by his own admission. Do you think the White House is feeling confident of getting further movement on Russia-Ukraine?
That's a great question. I think, to your point, I do think the president thinks he's on a roll and would love to notch another win in such close proximity in his eyes. On the other hand, to your point, this is an extremely difficult, protracted fight that may not operate on the president's timeline here. And to your point, this really centers around this next discussion around these Tomahawk missiles, which would allow Ukraine to strike deeply into Russia and would open a new front in the war. And this is why President Trump has said to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky that he wants to know what Ukraine plans to do with those missiles, right? That's been one of his big sticking points. The two of them had conversations over the weekend about the use of those missiles. I'm sure that will be a subject of conversation when President Zelensky comes to the White House on Friday. The one point that I think the president made really clear in talking about that over the weekend and about the conversations he had with President Zelensky was that he sees this sort of as a way to end the war, a way to pressure Russia. He said that he would need to speak or he might need to speak to President Vladimir Putin first about these missiles. The suggestion there being, Russia doesn't want this, right? And so he can say, hey, President Putin, do you want this? We're prepared to give these weapons to NATO, who will give them to Ukraine. Is this what you really want? Or are you ready to come to the table with a peace deal? So the president really sees this as a negotiating tool. uh, as much as it would be sort of a step up in the campaign to hand over these missiles. And so we just have to wait and see how these sort of pieces that are on the chessboard end up playing out.
And we will hear more from Donald Trump at least a couple of times today. He's got the president of Argentina, Javier Milei, in the White House for lunch. He's also issuing the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously to Charlie Kirk, 4 o'clock. That will be a big moment for the MAGA movement, but again, will be an opportunity as well for Trump to take questions. The latest phase of the U.S. China trade war kicks in as of this morning. These are new fees that each country is whacking on the other's ships, essentially, to use their ports. US announced it first. China announced retaliatory measures last Friday. It's significant because it's yet another trade barrier between these two economic superpowers. And I was reading one analyst saying as well, Megan, that China's retaliation was particularly interesting because we're now in a world that whenever the US announces anything, China will look to hit back just as hard. That is what a trade war is. That is how these things escalate. And that is where we're at. And even as we saw Donald Trump over the weekend trying to de-escalate this thing with putting out nice truth social messages to Xi Jinping and talking on Air Force One as well about what a great guy he is. At the same time, this is still happening today. In fact, it has just happened. And, you know, the trade barriers between these two countries are only getting bigger, not smaller at the moment.
They are. I mean, this is really, I was talking to a lot of folks over the weekend about this, and they were saying, it feels like Groundhog Day with where we were with the Liberation Day tariffs
Right.
and the triple digit tariffs. And we're back there again. The one sort of saving grace this time is the 100% tariffs that the president has threatened to put on China won't take effect until November 1st. So that gives time for negotiation. And the president has made very clear in his public comments and on True Social that that is the goal. He at first, said he saw no reason to meet with President Xi when they are both in South Korea for the Asia Pacific Summit. Then he sort of walked that back, saying, no, I might still meet with him. We'll both be there, right? And that kind of, I think, plays to how the president sees these meetings. He likes to have the sort of one-on-one, leader-to-leader discussions to resolve some of these issues. But what we've really seen, I think, is this balance between, hitting back on China and these really sweeping export controls that they've announced that. I mean, I was talking with folks, they touch so many supply chains. It's just hard to overstate how massive this is. If China moves forward with this, and I'll say theirs is on a sort of staggered time frame as well, with a lot of their new rules taking effect on December 1st. So this does give the two countries time to sort of figure out some of these issues and, come to the negotiating table. And Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, was on yesterday, saying that he thinks this meeting is still going to happen, telegraphing optimism. Obviously, there's a large degree of sort of market soothing happening here, but, remains to be determined exactly how all of this plays out.
It seems to me the markets are pretty chill, really, given the sort of nature of this sort of lurching policy we're hearing from President back and forth. The markets have kind of got used to it, and they mostly seem to be ignoring it and are just continuing their upward trajectory almost regardless. They just don't really believe this stuff's going to happen, I guess, which is, I guess, tells you something about the president's economic policy and his approach to it and how seriously they take it. The other thing I think is really interesting about this, Megan, I was watching J.D. Vance on TV over the weekend, the vice president. He was really keen to use this moment as a sort of way of making the argument again to the Supreme Court that Trump's ability to use tariffs as he sees fit is a really important power that he needs to have. And you're hearing this argument from the administration again and again posed in different ways, even as the Supreme Court justices are considering this. This is, of course, a landmark case that we're going to hear from them at some point over the next couple of months. They're going to decide whether Trump ever had the power to just slap tariffs down the way he's been doing all year. It's a really big moment for the president. Vance was saying, well, look, what China's doing with export controls, the way you're talking about it, he said this really highlights why it was so important that Trump declared a national emergency and implemented these tariffs in the first place.
Absolutely. Although I think you have to think about the original reason the emergency was declared as saying, this national deficit or this this trade deficit is such a pressing threat that we need to have this authority, which is not, to solve conflicts in between Azerbaijan and Armenia or Pakistan and India, right? So I get the legal argument that they're trying to lay out
choose
here.
choose your own emergency, Megan. We got loads of them. Anyone you want, as long as you agree with this. Let's talk quickly about the government, which is still shut down. In case you'd forgotten, I'm sure the federal workers sitting at home haven't forgotten. We're 14 days into this now. The Senate is back after the long weekend off for an 8th vote this evening. We're not expecting the government to reopen with this vote, and we're not really seeing a lot of sign of movement, Megan. It feels like until either something happens or Trump decides to get involved, or like the pressure on services somehow gets to a point where the public suddenly gets more engaged than they currently are. It feels like this is just going to keep going on.
It really does. Though I'll say the big thing that's sort of at the top of my mind heading into this week is the action that we're seeing from Trump's budget director, Russ Vought, right? He sent out these reduction in force notices, culling the federal bureaucracy. We might see more of it in the near future. I think that is an interesting layer of complexity on top of the shutdown conversations. Some of the Republicans I was talking to before those notices went out were saying, I get why they want to do this. There's an argument to be made that, the workers who are working right now are essential and those who are home are not. It draws the very clean line that Russ Vought has been wanting to draw for some time. On the other hand, there's not actually, for all of the presidents talking about it and Russ Vought talking about it, there's not a reason this has to happen, during the shutdown per what they've said so far. These could be happening at any time. And so some of the Republicans that I've been talking to say this really risks muddying the message and making it seem like Republicans wanted this all along. And that gives Democrats an in to, pick away at Republicans and chip away at some of their approval numbers here. It's worth noting that poll numbers still show that, Republicans are being blamed at higher levels than Democrats, but, those numbers could shift. And so that's something that I'll be keeping an eye on.
Right. The other thing I reckon we'll see today is Democrats trying to seize upon the visit of the Argentinian president, who, as I said, will be in the Oval Office this afternoon. The America, of course, has agreed to, they say it's not a bailout, but they're kind of bailing out the Argentine economy, which is struggling a lot ahead of Milei's big elections coming this month. He, of course, is a right-wing populist leader, very aligned with Trump, very close to Trump, and they're essentially helping him out. And the Democrats see a political opening here. The basic argument they're making is, look, you can find $20 billion for Argentina, but you can't find the money to support Obamacare or other spending priorities that they think the Republicans should be prioritizing for the American people. That's quite a powerful argument if they can cut through. I don't think most Americans probably even know about the Argentina bailout at the moment, but not a bailout at the moment. But, if the Dems can get that message going, it's one that might resonate, I think.
And I think that's the question is that's a big if the Democrats can get the message across. They have really been struggling at the messaging wars lately.
You bet. Lately, for quite a long time now. Before we go, we should say we're keeping an eye on Chicago again this week. We're still waiting for decisions from the federal courts about whether the military incursions there and also in Portland are going to continue or go ahead. And this even made it onto Saturday Night Live when they were taking this one off.
It did, Saturday Night Live likes to traditionally open with these very political cold opens. And this week it was Tina Fey starring as Secretary Kristi Noem and Amy Poehler as Attorney General Pam Bondi, the dynamic duo of SNL from years past, reunited on stage to replay two of the most prominent characters of this administration.
Pam Bondi and Kristi Noem. And sure enough, Pam Bondi seemed to be enjoying it herself, according to her ex-feed.
She did.
There you go. The Trump administration, big fans of SNL. Who knew? We better leave it there, haven't we? We've been talking for ages. It's been great to see you. It's been great to see you, Megan. There's so much news happening.
There's so much.
There's always so much news, but it's been a pretty historic week so far. And it's
it has.
Tuesday morning. Thanks very much for listening. You can get more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. And we will, of course, be back with you tomorrow. Thanks for listening.